where faith, inspiration, and storytelling come together to bring the Bible to life like never before. Our mission is to take you on a spiritual journey through the Bible's stories, from the creation in Genesis to the revelations of the end times. Welcome to Timeless Bible Journeys.
What makes a man truly strong? Is it the muscles in his arms, the power in his fists, or something deeper, something unseen? History is filled with tales of mighty warriors, men of great physical power who could conquer armies and shape the fate of nations. But few stories are as compelling, as tragic, and as thought-provoking as that of Samson, the strongest man in the Bible, yet one of its most flawed characters. Imagine a man so powerful that he could tear apart a lion with his bare hands, yet so weak that he was undone by a single whisper. A man chosen by God, blessed beyond measure, yet ensnared by his own desires. Samson was more than just a warrior, he was a paradox. A man of faith who often strayed, a man of strength who was ultimately broken, and a man whose final act would define his legacy forever. But who was Samson really? Was he a hero or a warning? A man of destiny or a victim of his own recklessness? And most importantly, what can his story teach us today, thousands of years later? This is more than just an ancient tale. It's a story about power, betrayal, redemption, and the choices that define us. Stay with me as we explore the life of one of the Bible's most fascinating figures. And before we dive in, if you find stories like these meaningful, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's begin. A birth foretold, the divine calling. Long before Samson became the mighty warrior we know, his story began with something extraordinary, a divine prophecy. His birth was no accident. It was a miracle, a part of a plan set in motion before he even took his first breath. The Israelites, Samson's people, were suffering under the oppression of the Philistines. For 40 years they lived in fear, struggling under foreign rule. They cried out for a deliverer, someone who could free them from their bondage. And God in his mercy answered. But instead of sending an army, he sent a single child. A child who would be set apart from birth, destined for greatness. In a quiet Israelite home, there lived a barren woman, unnamed in the scriptures but known to God. One day, as she went about her life, an angel appeared before her. His words must have sent chills down her spine. You will conceive and give birth to a son. But he will not be like other children. He must never drink wine, never touch anything dead, and never cut his hair. For he will be a Nazirite, set apart for God, and he will begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. Can you imagine what she must have felt? Joy, fear, a sense of overwhelming responsibility? She ran to tell her husband Manoah, and together they sought guidance. If their son was chosen for such a great purpose, how should they raise him? What kind of man was he supposed to become? So Manoah prayed, asking God to send the angel again. And God listened. The angel returned, confirming the divine instructions. But even then, Manoah wanted more proof. Tell us, he asked, what will be the child's rule of life? How should we raise him? But the angel did not give more details. Instead, he said something profound. Everything I have commanded, let the woman observe. In other words, trust God's plan. Walk in obedience even when you don't see the full picture. Then, something astonishing happened. As Manoah prepared an offering, fire erupted from the altar, and in an awe-inspiring moment, the angel ascended in the flames, disappearing into the sky. Only then did Manoah realize they had seen a messenger of the Lord himself. Samson's birth wasn't just a happy event for his family, it was a turning point for Israel. His life had a purpose before it even began. But here's the question: what happens when a person born with such a calling starts to drift away from it? Samson was meant to be different. He was chosen, set apart, and given a power unlike any other. But as we'll soon see, having a calling doesn't mean living up to it. Sometimes, the greatest battles aren't fought on the battlefield, but within our own hearts. Strength beyond human limits. Strength, we admire it, we crave it, but what happens when strength is not just a gift, but a responsibility? Samson wasn't just strong, he was the strongest man who ever lived. But his power was never meant for his own glory. It was given to him for a purpose that he, at times, forgot. Picture this: a young Samson, walking alone on a path near the vineyards of Timnah. The sun is setting, the air is thick with the scent of ripening grapes. Suddenly, out of the shadows, a lion leaps toward him, its jaws wide open, ready to strike. Most men would freeze. Most men wouldn't stand a chance. But Samson, he doesn't reach for a weapon. He doesn't call for help. With his bare hands, he seizes the lion, tearing it apart as easily as if it were a young goat. No sword, no armor, just raw, divine power surging through his veins. This wasn't just brute strength. It was supernatural. It was a sign. Samson was different, set apart, a warrior unlike any other. But his greatest feats were yet to come. The Philistines feared him, and for good reason. Time and time again, he defied the odds, standing alone against entire armies. One of the most legendary moments? The battle at Lehi. Armed with nothing but the jawbone of a donkey, Samson found himself surrounded by 1,000 Philistine soldiers. Outnumbered, outarmed, but not outmatched. The moment they rushed toward him, something took over. Strength beyond human limits. With every swing, Philistines fell, 1, 10, 100, until the ground was littered with the bodies of 1,000 defeated warriors. When the dust settled, Samson stood victorious, exhausted but unbeaten, holding nothing but a crude bone in his hand. And what did he do next? He named that place Ramath Lehi, the hill of the jawbone, a reminder that with God's power, even the simplest weapon becomes unstoppable. But here's the thing about strength. It's not just about what you can do, it's about what you choose to do with it. Samson had power unlike any other, but power without wisdom is dangerous. His victories made him bold, his strength made him fearless. But being fearless is not the same as being wise. His feats of strength became legendary, but his heart? That was a different battle. He had the power to defeat armies, yet he struggled to master his own desires. And that struggle would soon lead him down a path of destruction. Strength is a gift, but when it's used without restraint, it can become a curse. Samson could break ropes, tear apart lions, and slay 1,000 men. But could he resist the weaknesses that lay within his own soul? As we'll soon see, true power isn't just about what you can conquer. It's about what you can control. A man of weaknesses, the battle within. Power. It can make a man a hero or his own worst enemy. Samson had strength beyond human limits, yet his greatest battle wasn't against the Philistines. It was against himself. Because what good is physical might when your heart is vulnerable to the very things that can destroy you? Samson could break chains, defeat armies, and tear apart lions with his bare hands. But there was one thing he couldn't break free from: his own desires. Time and time again, his weaknesses led him into danger, not on the battlefield, but in the choices he made, especially when it came to women. It started with his first love, a Philistine woman from Timnah. Against his parents' warnings, against the traditions of his people, he wanted her. "She is right in my eyes," he said, a phrase that would define his downfall. And so he married her. But love built on impulse rarely lasts. At their wedding feast, Samson challenged the Philistines with a riddle, a game that quickly turned into betrayal. His wife, pressured by her own people, tricked him into revealing the answer. When Samson realized he had been deceived, his rage consumed him. He left, storming away in anger, and when he returned, she had been given to another man. This was the first warning sign. But did Samson learn from it? No. Instead, his passions continued to lead him into dangerous territory. Fast forward years later. Samson, now a seasoned warrior, a judge over Israel, finds himself in Gaza, the heart of enemy territory. And what does he do? He visits a prostitute. He isn't there for battle. He isn't there on a mission from God. He's there to indulge his desires. The Philistines seize the opportunity, planning to capture him at dawn. But before they can strike, Samson rises in the middle of the night, walks to the city gates, and in a show of supernatural strength, rips them from their foundations. He carries them to the top of a hill miles away, an act of defiance, a display of raw power. But what does this moment really tell us? Samson was strong, yes, but he was reckless. His strength allowed him to escape the consequences of his actions, at least for a time. But no man, no matter how powerful, can outrun his own weaknesses forever. And then there was Delilah. If Samson's first love was a mistake and his visit to Gaza was recklessness, his relationship with Delilah was his undoing. She wasn't just another temptation, she was a trap. A carefully laid snare designed to exploit the one weakness Samson could never overcome: his inability to say no to his desires. Love, lust, power, pride. These forces are powerful enough to bring down even the mightiest of men. Samson had been chosen by God, blessed beyond measure. But what happens when a man stops living for his purpose and starts living for himself? As we'll soon see, even the strongest man in the world can be brought to his knees when his greatest enemy is within. The seduction of Delilah, a fatal flaw. Every great warrior has an Achilles heel, a weakness that, if exposed, can bring even the strongest man to his knees. For Samson, that weakness had a name: Delilah. By now, Samson had become a legend. The Philistines feared him, the Israelites admired him, and his strength remained unmatched. But despite all his victories, he had one fatal flaw. He could not resist the pull of temptation, and that flaw would soon lead him into the arms of the woman who would destroy him. Delilah was different. Unlike the Philistine woman from Timnah or the prostitute in Gaza, she wasn't just a passing desire. She was deliberate, calculated, and she had a mission. The Philistine rulers approached her with an offer: an immense sum of silver if she could uncover the secret to Samson's strength. She wasn't acting out of love. She was playing a game of betrayal. Night after night, she pressed him, whispering words of devotion, while her true intentions remained hidden. "Tell me the secret of your strength," she pleaded, her voice dripping with false affection. At first, Samson played with her, feeding her lies. "If you tie me with 7 fresh bowstrings, I will become weak." She did as he said, calling the Philistines to capture him. But the moment he awoke, he snapped the bowstrings like they were threads. Again she tried. "If you tie me with new ropes, I will become as weak as any other man." Once more she bound him, only to watch him break free with effortless power. A third time, he teased her. If you weave the 7 braids of my hair into a loom, I will lose my strength." She wove them tightly, but as soon as the Philistines attacked, he broke free once more. But Delilah was patient, and more than that, she was relentless. She knew Samson's heart, knew how to wear him down. And so she did what no army, no warrior, no battle had ever been able to do. She defeated him from the inside. She wept. She accused him of not loving her. She nagged him day and night, breaking him down, not with swords or chains, but with words. And finally, Samson caved. He revealed his secret. "My strength is in my hair. A razor has never touched it, for I am a Nazirite, set apart to God. If my hair is cut, I will become as weak as any other man." That night, as Samson lay asleep in her lap, Delilah called for a man to shave off his hair, strand by strand. With every cut, his strength faded. When the last lock fell to the ground, she whispered, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He awoke, expecting to shake them off as before. But this time, he felt nothing. The power that had once coursed through his veins was gone. He had betrayed his calling, and now God had left him. The Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and dragged him away in chains. The mighty warrior, the unbreakable Samson, had been broken, not by an army, not by a king, but by his own weakness. And so, the man who had once stood at the height of power now found himself at the lowest point of his life. Blind, humiliated, and enslaved by the very people he had spent his life fighting. His downfall was not a moment of sudden defeat, but the result of choices made long before. A slow erosion of purpose, a surrender to temptation, a disregard for the calling that once set him apart. But Samson's story isn't over yet, because sometimes, even in our darkest moments, there is still a chance for redemption. Even when we've lost everything, there is still a way back. And for Samson, that redemption would come, but at a great cost. Redemption in the darkest hour. The mighty Samson, once feared by armies, was now a shadow of his former self. His strength was gone, his sight was stolen. Shackled in bronze chains, he was dragged through the streets like a prize animal, mocked and humiliated by his enemies. The Philistines had won, or so they thought. Day after day, Samson toiled in the grinding mill of the Philistines, a task meant for the lowest of slaves. The man who once tore apart lions now pushed a millstone in darkness. The warrior who once carried city gates on his shoulders now stumbled blindly, his world reduced to shadows and whispers. The laughter of his captors echoed in his ears, a cruel reminder of how far he had fallen. But what the Philistines didn't realize was that something was happening, something they didn't see. Samson's hair began to grow back. But this wasn't just about hair. It was about something deeper. In the silence of his suffering, in the darkness of his captivity, Samson did something he hadn't done in a long time. He turned back to God, stripped of everything, his power, his pride, his freedom. He finally understood what true strength was. It had never been in his hair. It had never been in his fists. It had always been in his relationship with God. And now, in his lowest moment, he was ready to surrender, not to his enemies, but to his purpose. The Philistines decided to celebrate their victory with a grand feast in the temple of Dagon, their false god. Thousands gathered, laughing, drinking, praising their idol for delivering Samson into their hands. They called for him, bringing him out of the prison to entertain them. Blinded, weakened, Samson was led by a young servant to the center of the temple, where 2 massive pillars supported the structure. And it was there, in front of his enemies, that Samson prayed for the first time in years. "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, so that with one final act, I may take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." He placed his hands on the pillars, feeling their weight, their strength. And then, with everything he had left, he pushed. The temple shook, cracks split through the stone. The laughter of the Philistines turned to screams as the pillars collapsed, bringing the entire structure down. Samson died that day, but so did thousands of Philistines, including their rulers, in one final, decisive blow. In his death, he achieved what he had failed to do in his life. He fulfilled his purpose. Samson's story is one of strength, but also of weakness. He was called by God, gifted beyond measure, yet constantly led astray by his desires. He lost everything, not just his power, but his way. And yet, even in his darkest hour, he found redemption. Not because he was perfect, not because he deserved it, but because he turned back to the one who had called him in the first place. Maybe you've felt like Samson. Maybe you've made mistakes, lost your way, or fallen further than you ever imagined. But Samson's story reminds us of a powerful truth. Failure is not final. As long as there is breath in your lungs, there is a chance to turn back. Strength isn't about how powerful you are. It's about where you place your trust. In the end, Samson was not remembered for his failures, but for his faith. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson of all. What can we learn from Samson? Samson's story is more than just an ancient tale of strength and downfall. It's a mirror, one that reflects the struggles we all face. His life was marked by great power, but also by great mistakes. And yet, despite everything, his story didn't end in defeat. It ended in redemption. So, what can we learn from Samson? How does his life, full of both triumph and tragedy, still speak to us today? There are a few powerful lessons hidden in his journey. Lessons that can change the way we see strength, weakness, and the path to redemption. 1. Strength alone is not enough. Samson was given supernatural strength, but that strength wasn't meant for his own glory. It was a gift, a tool, meant to serve a greater purpose. Yet time and time again, he misused it. Chasing personal revenge, feeding his desires, acting impulsively instead of wisely. His downfall wasn't caused by a stronger enemy. It was caused by his inability to control himself. And isn't that true for all of us? We may not have Samson's physical power, but we all have strengths, talents, abilities, intelligence, influence. But without wisdom, without discipline, those strengths can lead to our downfall. Strength alone is never enough. It's how we use it that matters. 2. Our greatest enemy is often within. Samson's battles weren't just against the Philistines. His greatest battle was against himself. His own impulses, his unchecked desires, his inability to resist temptation. He wasn't defeated by a warrior in battle. He was defeated by a woman's whisper, by his own failure to guard what mattered most. And that's something we all face. Often our biggest struggles aren't external, they're internal. It's the habits we can't break, the emotions we let control us, the choices we know are wrong, but still make anyway. True strength isn't just about conquering others, it's about conquering ourselves. 3. Small compromises lead to big downfalls. Samson didn't fall in a single moment. His downfall was a slow erosion, a series of small compromises. It started when he ignored his parents' warning about marrying a Philistine woman. It continued when he played games with his enemies, when he indulged in his desires without considering the consequences. And finally, it reached its breaking point when he trusted Delilah, despite every warning sign. That's how most failures happen, not in an instant, but in small, seemingly harmless steps. A little compromise here, a small mistake there, until one day we wake up and realize we've lost something we can't get back. Samson's life is a warning. Be careful of the small choices, because they shape the big ones. 4. Failure is not final. Samson made mistake after mistake. He lost his power, his sight, his freedom. By all accounts, his story should have ended in disgrace. But it didn't, because in his lowest moment, when he had nothing left, he turned back to God. And in that moment, he found his purpose again. His strength was restored, not for his own glory, but to fulfill the mission he had been born for. No matter how far you've fallen, no matter how many mistakes you've made, Samson's story proves one thing: failure is not final. As long as you have the strength to turn back, there is still hope. Redemption is always possible. 5. True strength comes from dependence on God. Samson's greatest mistake was thinking his strength came from himself. He believed he could do whatever he wanted and still be unstoppable. But the moment he took his calling for granted, the moment he forgot where his strength really came from, he lost everything. But in the end, when he had nothing left to rely on, he finally understood. His last prayer wasn't for revenge. It wasn't for personal glory. It was for the chance to fulfill his purpose. And that's when his true strength returned. Real strength isn't about how powerful we are. It's about recognizing where our power comes from. It's about humility, dependence, trusting in something greater than ourselves. Samson's life was messy, complicated, full of contradictions. He was a man of great potential, but also of great flaws. And yet, he is still remembered as one of the great judges of Israel. Not because he was perfect, but because, in the end, he found his way back. Maybe you see yourself in Samson. Maybe you've made choices you regret. Maybe you've lost your way or feel like you've fallen too far to get back up. But Samson's story tells us this: no one is beyond redemption. No mistake is too great. No failure is too final. If we're willing to turn back, if we're willing to surrender, there is always a second chance. So the question is, what will you do with your strength? Will you waste it? Misuse it? Or will you learn from Samson and use it for something greater than yourself? What do you think of Samson? Was he a tragic hero or a cautionary tale? Let me know in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, strength isn't just about power, it's about how we choose to use it. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay strong in mind, body, and spirit.